Welcome to episode 30 of Books to Last. This episode, I'm joined by Cheyenne as they share their fantastic list of books they would take with them when cast away to a mystery remote location. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Books to Last podcast. Hi Cheyenne, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to the listener.
Hello, I'm Cheyenne and I run a bookstagram, and that's kind of how we got in touch for this podcast, was through Instagram. And I have been a reader my entire life, always been a big book nerd, and took a bit of a hiatus in college because college is stressful and there's no time for anything for pleasure. So I was able to pick reading up again after I graduated. And as you can see behind me, I have lots and lots of books now. So I got my book fix.
I completely relate to that. I was the same. I sort of read a lot as a small child, and then there was a big drop off when sort of went to higher education, and then I eventually came back into it. I feel like if you manage to read all the way through higher education, I mean, I applaud you. It's difficult.
I don't know who has the emotional fortitude to be able to read for pleasure and do all of your work.
Yeah, it's just who has that many hours in the day. I'm starting to get into, because I'm studying part-time, I'm starting to get into the end bit of my qualification when I'm going to have to do quite a bit of reading and research for the actual qualification. I'm like, oh, if I read that many research papers, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pick up a book afterwards, but we're hoping. I mean, are you reading anything in particular? You read a lot now. What's your current read?
So currently I'm reading The Fae Keeper, which is the second book in the Witch King duology by H.E. Edgmon. And it is just as amazing and angsty as the first book. Just so much teen queer angst. I'm here for it.
Sounds excellent. It's not a series I've heard of before, but yeah, it definitely sounds like a lot of fun. And I mean, you mentioned Fae Keeper. I mean, is that it's fantasy? Yes. So
yeah, it's YA fantasy. I read a lot of YA. That's most of what I read, and that's probably mostly what's on my list is YA.
We're a YA fantasy friendly podcast. I am a big fan of YA fantasy as well. And that's pretty much what brought me back into reading also, because it's just I've always loved fantasy, but it's just accessible in a way that some of the slightly more classic or thingy fantasy maybe isn't. I think it's kind of difficult to go in cold from reading nothing to reading Game of Thrones.
Yeah, so I like how not as complicated, I guess it is, or it's easier to digest than Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is a lot.
Yeah, I think there's a time for a different thingy, but most of the time I'm like, oh yeah, no, and also the YA genre just generally across, regular fiction and fantasy and all that sort of thing is doing really great things. I think it's just in a good place.
I feel like YA has had a renaissance in the last 5 years or so, where I feel like the quality of the writing in YA books is way, way better than it used to be. Because I have gone back and read books that came out when I was in high school, and I was like, ooh, why? This is not a good book.
Yeah, we've definitely come a long, long way from the sort of dystopian trilogies that I used to devour when I was young, like one after another.
Games, Twilight, period of time.
Yes, we have come a long way since Twilight, definitely, which is
no shade to the Twilight.
No shade to Twilight. Twilight has been chosen multiple times on this podcast by different people and they all tend to admit it's for nostalgic purposes, but I did read Twilight when it came out. I do advocate for the books over the films. If someone's going to dip into that world. But it's like a lot of series from around the time. It's got its issues, and as long as you can talk about that with an open mind and an open heart, then it's all good.
Yes.
So currently reading the Fae Keeper. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the books that you really, really enjoy as well. Because for listeners who don't know, maybe this is their first episode, Books to Last podcast is the podcast that challenges book lovers and readers to pick the 5 books, their 5, not necessarily favourites, but well, I would say favourites, the 5 favourite books that they couldn't live without and that they'd read over and over, especially if they were castaway to a mystery remote location, and they were only allowed to take 5 books with them. As part of this, our guest gets to pick their mystery remote location. So, Cheyenne, where would you like to be cast away to?
I think I want to be cast away on some kind of faraway alien planet.
Oh, yeah, this is okay. So, we've only ever had one space answer before, and I actually think it's such a cool answer that I'm so glad that we have a space related answer now, because it just sounds, I mean, what could be more serene than looking at like the solar system whilst reading?
I know, space is just so pretty. Plus, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, so I have to get the space in there and the sci-fi in there. So
Oh, so I mean, you say a planet, but I mean, are you gonna have, or are you thinking maybe more ship? Have you got like a Star Trek ship that you would pick if you were gonna have that ship all to yourself in space to read?
oh my gosh, I don't know. I mean, probably if it's gonna be a ship, I have to go with the USS Enterprise. Just the first one, no
The
bloody A
OG, yeah.
or D. Yeah, channeling my inner Scotty. For those of you, if you know, you know.
Well, I mean, it sounds like a great place to go and a great place to start. So, what's the first book you will be taking with you to space?
Okay, so the first book on my list, in no particular order, is Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. And I have no idea if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, so please, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Pronunciations aren't my strong suit.
Same. You're speaking to someone who read Percy Jackson as a young child and came up with interesting pronunciations for all of the Greek words that she'd never heard before, to the point where my best friend still finds it absolutely hilarious to make fun of me for some of them. She just thinks they are the funniest thing ever, and she brings them up many times. So, Raybearer is a book that I've heard about, but not a book that I'm familiar with. Would you mind giving us sort of what's it
Yeah.
about?
So Raybearer is a duology, and it's African-inspired fantasy. So it's a secondary fantasy world, and called Aritsar is the world that we're in, and it's about this girl named Tarasai who has these abilities where if she touches a person, she can steal their memories or share a memory with them. And so growing up, she's kind of grown up in a neglected kind of place. Her mom is kind of very emotionally abusive and controlling, and she doesn't get touched at all. No one wants to touch her because they're afraid she's going to steal their memories. And then she gets commanded by her mom through magic to go to the capital of Aritsar to try to become one of the Council of 11 for the new prince. And the prince is eventually going to become the king and be the Raybearer, which is the person who holds this kind of magical amulet that connects them with the 11 other council members, where they're physically connected in that way. So it's very much like a found family type of situation, except Tarasai's problem is that her mom wants her to kill the prince. So that kind of puts a bug in things. And so I really love this world. I love found family tropes. They're probably my favorite trope, and there's a lot of that in here. We get a lot of like grumpy sunshine things here as
Oh
well.
my, oh
I
my
love
love.
it's so good. I'm a sucker for grumpy sunshine.
It's like you're selling this book specifically to me. I really enjoy the found family trope as well. I think because, I mean, I don't know if it's a common thing, but I mean, I'm not particularly close to a lot of my sort of blood relatives, but I have got a really strong support network around me of my own family, but also family that you've thingy. So I just feel like I love it. I just think you get such interesting dynamics in it, and yeah, Grumpy Sunshine, I do love. Um, I want to say that that probably is like representative of my own relationship, but I feel like we're more like grumpy grumpy as a
Yeah, I feel that. I'm definitely the grumpy side of Grumpy Sunshine. So that makes sense for me. But yeah, this book has a great cast of characters. I love a good group of very dynamic characters, and they're all very different. And I just love it. And the magic in this place is so fascinating. Like each person has their own abilities that are so unique and original. They're ones that I haven't necessarily seen before in other fantasy. And the other thing about going back to talking about found family, as a queer person, I think that's like one of the reasons why I love that is
yeah,
because queer people often do have to have found family because their families don't often accept them for who they are. And so
yeah.
finding that found family and then reading books about that is definitely what I look for in books. And of course the world building in this is amazing. And I just also I may have a tiny bit of a crush on Jordan Ifueko because she's just so adorable and I just think she's amazing.
I mean, it definitely sounds like it just has like the whole package. I mean, just digging a little bit into because I'm really curious about the powers of the main character. Um so is it automatic? Does she if she touches someone does it automatically do her power or is her controlling it kind of an arc of the story or
I think it's a little bit of both. When she first gets to the capital, it's like as soon as she touches somebody, something's happening. And so people are finding that they're losing memories or they're getting flashes of her trauma,
oh, yeah, that's
which
not
is
what you want.
no. So I mean, this book is just so wonderful and it's interesting because it is a duology. And so the first book is very much like, here's this world, here are these amazing characters. I hope you fall in love with them, with this amazing world. And then the second book is like just a lot of drama and sadness and anxiety, and that's a lot.
It's so often the case, isn't it, with series? Because I feel like the first book is so much about drawing you in and making you love the characters and showing you this world and like bringing physical, like sort of bringing an attachment between you and it. And then obviously, the longer you stay in it, I always find that it's like that I mean, in everything. I mean, even in like musicals and that sort of thing. It's just like the first act is always more fun and light and sunny, and then it just gets gradually darker, and then you end up getting the resolution. But especially in duologies, my experience is you adore the first one, and then the second one crushes your soul in some way
Yeah,
because that was
that's a pretty good summary.
just because that was my experience. Like Six of Crows, I think, was probably the first duology that I read, and I just like the second one. I was like, no, why have you got to do this to
Yeah, exactly. And that's how this one is too. So it's cool. But I love it because this book is really about, you know, finding your people and
yeah,
finding yourself within those people and being more confident and being able to open up to other people. And I love that. I think so many people, especially young queer people,
yeah,
need to see that kind of stuff. And the amount of diversity in this book is amazing. Like, there's the whole cast of characters, they're all different ethnicities and skin tones. And we even find out that, like, one of them is asexual or on the ace spectrum and like there and it's so wonderful to see that happening a lot more in YA fantasy.
yeah. That was going to be my next question because obviously a lot of the themes we've discussed in the book are really important to like the queer community. I think it does it have like a lot of queer representation in it, or
Yeah, it does. There's definitely lots of queer representation and it gets more obvious in the second book, but it's
yeah.
definitely there. There's some definite queer vibes and I'm here for it.
Yeah, I really enjoy. I especially enjoy that, like YA, as well as it having a lot of representation across all sort of all different groups as well. It also is less and less becoming the centerpiece of the story in a way that I mean, when it first started to sort of when representation started being slightly more widespread in sort of books and that sort of thing, it kind of felt like that was almost a big focal point as opposed to just having diverse characters who are just diverse characters, and that's not the point. Almost it's like completely not normalized. Normalized isn't the word I want, but it's just it's there because
Yeah.
that's what life is like. Life is full of diverse people as well,
Yes.
and it's
Yeah,
like,
I mean, and I love that. I love seeing queer people in a story, but it not being about them being queer.
yeah, exactly.
Because we've got plenty of those stories. So, it's just put a bunch of queer people in a fantasy world and let them go do weird stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's just let it just let it be. Just let it exist.
Yeah.
Well, Raybearer, that's really sounds like a really strong sort of start. It's fantasy. Is fantasy a I mean, you mentioned YA might be a sort of theme, but is fantasy definitely a big theme in the list as well? Because I mean, I'm a big
Yeah.
fantasy fan, so that's all
Yeah.
that's all good with
Fantasy
me.
is yeah, fantasy and sci-fi are definitely the two genres I read the most, and fantasy far more than anything else. That just tends to be what I'm drawn to. It's my comfort genre, I guess.
Amazing. I'm the same. Yeah, it's like pure escapism for me. It's like I don't want it to be like my world. I want it to be different. um, so yeah, that sounds like a really great one, and we love sci-fi love on the podcast because sci-fi. Yeah, this is discussed in sort of a recent episode that's coming out just before this one, but like sci-fi doesn't get the love it deserves for how dynamic and interesting a genre it is. So we do enjoy that. So
And that's
yeah,
perfect segue for my next book,
amazing.
I chose, which was Kindred by Octavia Butler. First of all, Octavia E. Butler is my favorite author. Love her. I've read everything that she's put out, and I wish she were still alive because I can't imagine the kind of stuff that she'd be putting out now. I mean, everything that she has written is so prescient and like eerie almost. But anyway, I chose Kindred because it's a sci-fi book, but it's not heavy sci-fi and it's not like spacey sci-fi. It's like it's this actually it was the first sci-fi novel written by a black woman. So
Oh wow,
that's
that's
a huge thing is,
yeah.
black women in sci-fi. Octavia E. Butler is the woman that started that. Like she is the one that broke into that and inspired many, many other black women authors to write sci-fi. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
It's definitely worth throwing out there. That's a really interesting fact. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so this book is sort of part sci-fi, part uh, historical fiction too. So we get the main character, Dana. She's a black woman in 1973 in California, and she is one day inexplicably pulled back in time to the antebellum period in Maryland. And so imagine being a black woman in the 70s, and then all of a sudden during slave times, and you have to learn how
Yeah.
to deal with that. And she finds out that the reason she keeps getting pulled back there after coming forward to her present time for a little while is because every time she's pulled back, it's in order to save this white man from dying. And she finds out she has to continue doing this or she won't exist in the future. So let those things add up for a second.
Right. Okay.
So this book is a huge examination of that, of the antebellum period and what it's like for black women and what it was like then for black women, not just in the 70s, but during slavery and what those implications mean. It implies that rape happened. For her to exist, this white man has to live. And the only reason that would happen is if there was a
Yeah.
rape involved. And so that is kind of part of it. And this book is gut wrenching. It is a lot, but it is
Yeah.
so beautifully written. And Butler has such a way with words and such a way with just helping you understand what is going on and what that feels like for this main character. And it's such a powerful book, and I feel like everyone should read it because it really is a great examination of like modern times versus slavery and what that was like.
Yeah, it sounds, and also it's so fascinating that it is science fiction as well, because so often science fiction is like associated with space, pretty much space and aliens and that sort of thing, but it's not. And time travel is absolutely a huge part of science fiction, and it's a really interesting way of using that to examine historical context, and as you say, sort of comparing the times, because I mean, America in the 70s wasn't exactly the most accepting or friendly place either. But I mean, in comparison, it's just it's a very
Yeah,
interesting sort of cross section, I think is maybe the
it
word I'm
is.
looking for to take. And yeah, that sounds, and I mean the author just sounds so fascinating as well, because now I'm also in the same vein as you, like, oh, what might have come afterwards, because it's often the way I feel about sort of authors like Douglas Adams, who actually authors who were incredibly talented but never actually wrote very much, or at least never published very much. So you only get a very small, I suppose, segment of what they might have produced, and then it's almost like, the limitless list of potential and all that sort of thing. And then it always seems to be those brilliant minds that tend to leave us far, far too soon.
Yeah, because I one of the books that I didn't choose for this list, also by Octavia Butler, is Parable of the Sower. And that book is, she wrote, when did she write that? In the 90s, maybe, I think. And when she wrote that, she basically predicted the Make America Great Again slogan and Trump-esque president. And like, it's eerie, like how
Yeah.
predicted and how correct she was on a lot of stuff. And anyway, just a quick aside about that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole sort of, I find that always fascinating, especially, I mean, sci-fi, it happens in a lot as well, because it almost, sci-fi kind of gives authors the permission to sort of just really think about how things might be completely different to the way they are. But the ironic thing is with sci-fi is often it's never actually that far from,
Yeah. Well, the thing
the
I love
realm.
about sci-fi is that it's not talking about the future, even if it's set in the far future.
Yeah.
It's really a commentary on what's happening today. And that's really the point of sci-fi, is to be able to tell these stories in a more palatable way, or in a more
Mm.
safe way. That's what Star Trek does. It does, yeah,
Yeah.
it talks about human issues using an alien to give us a different perspective and have us see, what it would be like for somebody else to be going through that.
Yeah, and it's exactly the same with, like, I suppose classic sci-fi like Frankenstein, which I would classify as more of sci-fi than horror. And I mean Dracula, even though it is horror, they were both books that were, they tell you about the time they were written in. And I recently read, it was War of the Worlds, and I mean when that was produced as well, I think, and oh my god, I mean I'm gonna get like if I'm wrong about this, I am thinking, but I'm fairly certain it was written before um like the World War and everything. And it's one of those things that it's like, in a way, even though, yeah, sci-fi very much talks about like themes of the past, also themes of the present, but in, I suppose this is very depressing, but ultimately history repeats itself. We're in a, it's cyclical things, and do come back around again. So like predicting Trump's presidency and that sort of thing, I mean, I'm going to use this word very loosely because I don't think it applies to him, but charismatic leaders that have poor intentions for the country that they lead, is
Yeah,
something that is sort of seen before. And then, yeah, but it's always just, you can get so much knowledge, you can just mine so much knowledge from sci-fi, from seeing how things were when it was written and that sort of
yeah.
thing. You can
And
really
it's
dig a
also
lot into it.
it's also wonderful because it's an extrapolation on what is already happening. So, that's what speculative fiction and sci-fi is. It's talking about, here's the climate change issue now. Here's what it could look like in 100 years.
Yeah, climate change books that sort of talk about climate disaster seem to be a lot more prolific, and I, some of them are so fascinating, but I
Mhm.
struggle to because it's just so, it's so present at the moment. It's impossible to, I don't know how you can deny climate change in this day and age, because it's here, it's happening. And yeah, so it's, yeah, it's all very heavy stuff, but like you say, in a slightly more palatable, if you want to switch that part of your brain off and just read the book for what it is, it can happen, but it is difficult to do that, I
Yeah.
think, sometimes as well. But fascinating sci-fi pick for second book from, an icon and a trailblazer. So I mean, you're setting the bar pretty high with your first two
Yeah.
books.
Um, so
What's
the
the
second
third
one is
one?
more fun. This next one.
Yes.
So next one is The Princess Bride by William Goldman. I
Sorry.
love, of course, everybody knows the movie, but I love the
Mm,
book. I particularly love the book because it's just as hilarious as the
mm.
movie is, and you get so much more. So much more. Yes, you have a copy. I have a giant copy. I have a giant edition that's beautiful. It doesn't even fit on my bookshelf. That's how big it is. Uh,
Oh my gosh, you need to send me a picture of that edition after we finish
I
recording because
definitely will.
I am going to try and find a copy because yes, I read that for the first time this year. But tell me why you love it.
So I love it because it's just so funny. It's so light,
So funny.
but it's so familiar. So it's like a warm hug every time you read it. And in the book, you get a lot more perspective from Inigo and Fezzik. So you
Mm.
get way more character development for everyone other than just Buttercup and Wesley. And you also get a whole lot more of the pit of despair. Like there's a whole other thing happening with Inigo and Fezzik where they have to go through all these different obstacles and defeat these creatures and booby traps and all these different things, and it's just so much richer than the movie. Even though the movie, I could watch that a million times and never be sick of it. That's how I feel about the book too.
Definitely, it's so much fun. It's just fun. There's no better word to sort of describe it, and it's so cleverly written as well because obviously William Goldman uses like a false narrator type. Honestly, he was so convincing with how he writes it, as if he's actually abridging a longer real novel. He was so convincing that I was like, oh my god, I almost want to read the original. And then did research, and I was like, but it's not real. This is the book, and he's so convincing.
Yeah.
He sells you on it. You really think that this is an abridged version of a really old book, and I'm like, how have I never heard of the original version of this if it's so good?
And I loved that the first time I read it, like he has those little asides all
Oh, they're
through the
so
book.
funny.
And they're hilarious. I never thought that like editorial comments from the author were going to be as funny as that, and it didn't take me out as much as I thought it would. And you just if you didn't
Yeah,
know that it's not real, it's
yeah.
so impressive.
Absolutely everything he adds as an aside in brackets is just it's just so funny, and just the characters are funny, and it's just told in such a straightforward way, and it's not overly flowery in a way that a lot of books that do sort of write in this sort of thing. It's good storytelling, and I like that it's so short because I do think that like a sign of good writing is being able to sort of say it with not as many words. Don't get me wrong, I love flowery prose as much as the next person,
Oh, I
when
hate
I'm
it.
in the mood for it.
I hate it. So be as succinct as possible.
Yeah, when I'm in the mood for it, I can really go for. I mean, like God, I'm probably gonna get some flat for this, but Shakespeare, for instance, I feel like he could say a lot of what he says with a lot less words. But if I'm in the mood for it, I can definitely, read some Shakespeare. But Dickens, no, I've read A Tale of Two Cities, and it's the only book that I've ever been interested in the plot, but I've fallen asleep whilst reading it, because it's so much hard work. But Goldman doesn't have that issue with The Princess Bride because it's just fun, and I love that kind of story, the sort of swashbuckling high adventure. We're gonna go, and it's so straightforward in the sort of fairy tale esque of there's a princess, they need to be saved. We're gonna
Yes.
do it with horses. There's this bad guy, they're the bad guy because we said they're the bad guy. It's
It's the
like
simplicity of it. It's the simplicity and the predictability, I think, that makes it so comfortable. And also, I love in the book that Buttercup's not as useless as she is in the movie.
no, she's so funny in the book. I really like. I remember reading it, just like, yeah, she knows she knows what's up. She knows
But
what's
I
up.
think the 80s happened, so you had to downplay a lot of that.
Yeah, definitely. I remember reading because I think I read it in Kindle. I bought this paperback copy afterwards because I didn't have a copy, and I was like, and once I'd finished it, I was like, I have to own my own copy of this. But when I was reading it, I was sort of putting little notes in it, and even though it is so simple, because it's so simple, it almost keeps you guessing because you think it can't be that simple. So, I mean, I was reading it, and when the man in the black mask, spoiler alert, does actually get thinking, I'm all the way into his introduction, I'm just like, this has got to be Wesley, right? And then it doesn't happen, and then there's some things that make you think it might not be, and I'm like, it's not, or is it? Maybe it is. Is it? And then obviously it gets arranged. I was like, I knew it. And yeah, it's just it. Oh, it's so fun. It's definitely something I think everyone should read. Funnily enough, I ended up reading it because I was looking at my Goodreads to TBR list, and it was the oldest book on my TBR. It had been on there since 2015, and I was like, okay, I think it's time. 7 years later, I think it's time I read this book that I said I wanted to read 7 years ago.
It's been a while since I've read it, actually. I read it in high school, so it's been a while.
Mm.
So I do need to find time to reread it because it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, I think it needs a really good audiobook because Audible at the moment does not have an audiobook for it and they are missing a trick. They need to get
Well, get on
someone.
it, Audible. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good book with the right narrator that could be
Mandy Patinkin all the way.
just yeah, I oh, what does she narrate?
Mandy Patinkin is the actor that played Inigo Montoya.
Oh my gosh, yes. No, okay, so I've not watched the film, but I mean,
You
I
gotta
know,
now.
I know, I know. I've got to. Okay, yeah, but if they're anything like in the book, that he was my favorite character. Definitely, I have got a jacket that I put patches on, and I found one on Etsy that says you know the "Hello, my name is" stickers.
I've got the
Amazing.
magnet.
Amazing. Well, you know the stickers, the sort of red ones that say "Hello, my name is," sort of for when you go to a vet. It's that, but underneath it says "Anago Montoya" and "You killed my father, prepare to die" in the little written bit, and it's like embroidered. I'm like, I absolutely need that patch for my jacket. So,
That would be fantastic.
oh yes, The Princess Bride, so fun, and definitely one I can second your recommendation to go ahead and read that one. Is there anything else you want to add to Princess Bride before we?
No, but you gotta watch the movie.
I will. I
So good.
absolutely. I am going to have a day where I dedicate to watching movies that I should have watched a long time ago. So, The Princess Bride is on there. My very good friend Ruby has been telling me since I met her that I absolutely have to watch the 2005 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, and I don't want to because I am loyal to the BBC adaptation, but I suppose we can try. So yeah, I will. I will probably have to couple those ones up with a few films that I've promised my brother that I will watch because we made an ill-advised deal where I gave him a bunch of really good recommendations and he gave me some not as good recommendations in exchange, and he's watched my recommendations and loved them, so now I need to watch his and be nice.
Yeah, that's gonna be tough.
Yes, it is, because in exchange for telling him to watch Knives Out, I got told to watch the new Mummy movie with Tom Cruise, and it's not good. It's bad. It's very bad.
I didn't even know there was a new Mummy movie, and why is Tom Cruise in it?
Is Tom Cruise? Is it Tom? Yeah, Tom Cruise from Top Gun. Yes, Tom
Yeah,
Cruise is definitely. Yeah, him. He's in it. It's awful. It's a terrible film. I've never thought that anybody would try and make a sexy mummy, but they did, and it's just
just doesn't work.
it just yeah. I really. He's really into his Egypt at the moment. So like I messaged him and said, there were some things that I liked. I liked the concept of some other things, but I was like, not for me, not for me.
Well,
I will
the only Mummy movie that matters is the one with Brendan Fraser.
Exactly. When I told my husband I was going to be watching the new Mummy movie, and I went to put it on, he was like, Brendan Fraser's not in this, and I was like, no, it's the new one, and he was just like, we are a Brendan Fraser loyal household. What are you doing? So I had a lot of explaining to do, and he also had to watch the film with me, and he was equally unimpressed. So yeah. Anyway, slight mummy tangent off the back of The Princess Bride, which even I'm not quite sure how my mind managed to swing that one.
We got
But
there.
yes, but I will definitely be watching the Princess Bride movie. And I'll have to let you know when I watch it to tell you what I think. But yes, number 4 then. What is the fourth book that you'll be taking with you in what is such a great list so far? Great, yeah.
All right. This one is The Bone Witch by Rin Chupeco. And this is also another YA fantasy. So we can see a theme here. So Rin is a non-binary Filipino author, and this is a secondary fantasy world, and it's sort of like think geishas, but with magic and are also badass warriors.
most of my favorite things. Amazing. Yeah.
So because of that, we also have a lot of political intrigue, which I love.
Oh, yeah. I'm a
And
politics nerd, so yeah, you're
yeah,
really speaking to
there's a
me.
lot of politics in this series. It's a trilogy. And so we follow a girl named Taya who turns out who accidentally summons her dead brother back to life, and so
As you
finds out,
do. We've all done it.
you know, so she finds out that she's what's called a bone witch, or a dark geisha, a dark asha rather, not geisha, dark asha, and that means she's a necromancer. So she has command over bones and dead things and stuff like that. Um, and it's about Taya becoming an Asha, becoming this full-fledged Asha, and training with the other Asha. And it's just so, the writing is so decadent. It's so rich. Like, Chupeco layers descriptions in a way that like makes you feel like you're there. Like you just want to suck it all in. There's just so much scenery to chew on without feeling like you're reading Herman Melville where we're still talking about something 6 pages later. It's not that.
Yeah.
Um, but it's
Yeah.
still good, and the world building that Rin does is it's so amazing. I mean, it's using a lot of Asian type of inspiration, and it's just I feel like I'm getting repetitive, but it's just so good. And the way that Rin is able to weave like two different timelines together in a seamless way is fascinating, and the magic is fascinating. It's a lot of elemental magic, which I love a good elemental magic.
It's the
Um,
yeah.
and we also get an enemies to lovers romance, and it's not even who you think it's gonna be for most of the series.
Oh, I love that they actually surprise you. It's not just like the Scooby Doo school of thinking where it's the first person you meet.
No,
I
yeah, it definitely, you're like, oh, I don't know about this, and then you're like, yes. Anyway, so no spoil. Trying not to do any spoilers right now.
okay.
But we get Taya is definitely morally gray. I feel like anytime you have a necromancer as your main character, they're gonna be a little
Well,
morally gray.
it's dark magic. They have to sort of
Yeah,
toe the
but
line.
bone witches aren't inherently bad, but they are reviled in this world, even though people need them. So it's this kind of like balancing act of like, we need you, so we'll keep you here, but we don't really like you that much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a big focus on the clothing in this series. Like, clothes mean a lot. Like, the clothing and the accessories and flowers all symbolize something very specific. And, like, a lot of times you don't even know what the significance is until, like, a book later, or maybe 2 books later. You're like, what? So that's how I felt reading this whole series. I'm just reading it. I'm going, oh my God, what? What is happening? And just loving it. And the ending was so satisfying.
Oh, okay. So Rin Chupeco is actually an author that I have followed on social media because their presence is like really great on there. Um, and I knew they were an author, but never actually got around to reading any of the books. So
Yeah, definitely. I definitely recommend Bone Witch as a good starting point for Rinchu Peko,
yeah.
because it really is pure fantasy. Some of their earlier works were more horror.
Oh, I'm a
So
baby when it comes to horror. I'll start with the Bone
yeah,
Witch.
me too. The Bone Witch is definitely the way to go if you want to start something. And I actually just reread this book a couple of months ago because I co-hosted a read along on Bookstagram with a friend to help promote the book series, because I just think it's so sorely underrated. It's so good, and I think honestly it's because Rin is an author of color, and they authors of color just tend not to get a lot of recognition. But go off with your Sarah J. Maas post every other day. Sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. There is, even though I don't know, it feels like there's movement in the right direction. It's still massively unevenly distributed in terms of coverage for different for authors from minority backgrounds, because I just, don't get me wrong, I read Sarah J. Maas, but like I'm very much just like, and I mean Cassandra Clare. I could list a few. I've read them, and it's not that I think that they're like not good, but I mean authors like them are they're kind of more likely to do fine without all of that money
Mm-hmm.
behind them, whereas it could just be redistributed to people who are less likely to just be picked up just cause. And yeah, but like I say, Rin, I have heard, I sort of, it's one of those things I know of, but I've never really, I suppose, because I go so much of recommendations, I don't read the synopses of books. I don't read blurbs. When I go into the bookstore, I'm very much. I know I shouldn't but judge a book by its cover. By 100% judge the books by the cover because I just don't. I like going in completely blind without like without the actual synopsis that has been put together by the publisher and the author themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I go so solely off recommendations from like people whose opinion I respect, like yourself and other people on Bookstagram that I follow, and sort of book people on social media, and friends. And then if I then have been introduced to an author and I like their stuff, I will try their other stuff, and then it's like a gateway that, and then yeah, I suppose it has to come into that way. But and I
Yeah.
guess I've just never never met anyone who has read The Bone Witch and
Yeah. It's
recommended
so
it to me.
good.
So
Oh my
you
gosh,
fixed
it's
that
so good.
now.
And the wonderful thing about it is that all of the books are available. They're already out, so you don't have to
Uh,
wait.
yeah, I have to wait till a series finishes before I start it because I'm gone all the days when I can wait 12 months for the next one to come out. It's just I forget what happens.
Oh gosh, me too. But yeah,
Yeah.
this book is just so amazing, and there's so many twists in this book, and it's just the creatures are amazing, and we also get an excellent sibling dynamic, which you don't see a lot of. A lot of in fantasy right now, like a lot of people are
Brothers
focusing
and
on
sisters don't
romance.
like each other.
But I love this sibling dynamic. Taya and her brother Fox are wonderful together. I love it. They are good siblings to each other, and I like to see that.
Yeah, I love siblings who are like also best friends. Like I like even I mean like twins, but also not twins. I just think like siblings who are just very innately close and just get on instead of, I don't know, in fantasy, siblings who are fighting over a crown, so they feel the need to constantly try and kill each other,
Yeah.
and yeah, that.
Over- yeah. And
Yeah.
actually, Rin Chupeco has another book that features siblings, twins, which is The Ever Cruel Kingdom. No, The Ever Tilting World. The Ever Cruel Kingdom is the second book.
Yeah.
So the Never Tilting World, and that's about these twins that are like long lost sisters, and it's a whole thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
Rinchu Pecco, just read their books.
Amazing.
They
And from
have a
what
new
you've,
book coming out actually, and it's an adult novel.
yes, I know, and Goldsboro have chosen it for their Goldsboro Sci-Fi Sci-Fi and Fantasy Fellowship, which is their monthly subscription when they send out books. Goldsboro, feel free to sponsor me. I will plug it as many times as you want. I used to be part of it. I had to suspend my subscription just before my son was born because I wasn't going to be able to read the books. But I recently got back onto the waiting list because I saw that they've announced that they are doing
Silver
um,
Under Nightfall.
yeah, they're doing a gorgeous edition of Rinchapeko's new book for that one for that month that it comes out, and I'm like, oh, I because I recognized the name and I was like, I need to have it, but you don't get it unless you're part of the membership. So I've had to try and rejoin the membership. We'll see if I get lucky.
Yes.
Uh, but
So sexy vampire threesome. I'm here for it. Yes, yes, yes.
yeah, and getting, I suppose, in a way, getting picked up by Goldsboro for one of their monthly memberships. They do not, it's not been maybe the most diverse selections of authors in the past, but it feels like that's sort of changing, and I always take that as a huge vote of sort of, it's definitely a gold star recommendation because they're so selective about the books that they choose for A, their memberships, but B, just to stock in their store, because you can't get every book that every new release in their store anyway. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great, it's a great extra endorsement for Rinchapeco for that one. So yeah, that, I mean, the Bone Witch is, it sounds fascinating, and it also sounds, from what you've told me about sort of the creatures and the clothes and the symbolism, that it is crying out for an illustrated edition.
Oh
Like,
god. And
someone.
Illumicrate has editions of the Bone Witch trilogy that are gorgeous. Gorgeous. And I'm jealous that I don't have them, but it's fine. It's fine. Oh, also just a little like extra little bit for about the Bone Witch is that there is queer people in the book. So, and I know that Rin had mentioned in one of their posts that all the books that they're writing going forward are going to have non-binary characters as the main character. So I love that. Love seeing more non-binary people out
Yeah.
there doing things.
That we love to see it. We love to see it. And that's really great. It's gotten to the point now, which I actually really like, that when I read a book and there isn't very diverse representation in it stands out more to me than
Mm-hmm.
when there's a book that has it. Like, it kind of, sometimes I can't necessarily, if I'm kind of not paying that much attention, I can't quite put my finger on it, and then I'll get about halfway through and I'll go,
Yeah.
that's what I'm noticing.
Doesn't mean that like every book has to have
No.
a main character of color, but like if you have none anywhere for any point in time, okay.
Yeah. Definitely, and I think it's interesting that people are definitely digging more into sort of, I suppose, nuanced cross-sectional minorities as well, because just everything from sort of socioeconomic background, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, just all of it. I just think it's interesting that people are. It's not a checkbox exercises. They're actually creating real three-dimensional characters that are real
Yeah.
people with nuances and layers and different
Yes.
aspects to their
And
life.
that's what I've been loving about YA from the last 5 years is because when I was reading in high school,
Mm.
there weren't very many books, let alone fantasy books that had
Mm.
black people in them or on the cover or were the main
Mm.
characters. And now I have a whole shelf full of, I could have a giant stack of books that's just black people, just black characters and black authors. And it's so beautiful. And I love seeing people who look like me be strong characters.
Yeah, I agree. I can't think of much of it from when I was younger. I mean, I think the only book series I can remember reading when I was younger that maybe had an ounce of representation or diversity in it, and it wasn't even necessarily like, a lot of it was like Rick Riordan's books, because, and even the first series, Percy Jackson, he acknowledges it isn't as, I suppose, diverse as his later series, but yeah, when there's only sort of like a handful of people out there, it's not good. But it's so good that it's changed. And I mean, I have a son now, and I know that, and he's getting books for the rest of his life. I don't care. He will read, and yeah, and I just feel so much better when I'm going out to sort of like buy books for him, and I'm going through sort of all the different age groups. That there's actually like a lot of differentiation into what I can offer him. I can show him people who aren't like him as well, which is just great, because I mean, that's what you need. That's what everyone needs. So yeah, oh, it's all really really good. And the bone witch, you've definitely you're not helping me with shrinking my TBR. I'm gonna be honest. Like, I've been trying to get it lower, not bigger. But
I'm not going to help you with that. I'm going to make it
yeah,
worse.
this yeah, it's my own fault for starting the podcast. It's been like this since day one, because the issue is a lot of the books are books that I've heard, like I may have heard of them or I know of them, but no one's ever actually really sold me on reading them. But when you have someone who it's like their favorite book and they love it and they can really talk to you passionately about how much they love it, it's so hard to not want to read it when you've seen it through that lens. There are some books that I had absolutely zero interest in reading until someone was like, "Oh no, you've got to read it because of this, this, and this is what it means to me." And I'm like, "Well, now I have to read it. Thanks." I'd ruled that one out, but I guess I can't anymore.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, pretty much. That should be what the podcast is called. Sorry, not sorry. So we're on your fifth and final book.
Yes. Okay, so my fifth and final book is Zodiac by Romina Russell, who it was also the author of Lobbyzona, except I think her name on that book was Romina Garber. So Romina Russell was her pen name before, and this is a quartet. So this is a longer series, and all of the books are already out. It's a little bit of an older series. And this one is a sci-fi fantasy. So we got a little bit of both in here. So it's a lot of spaceships, going to different planets, lots of like alien-ish things, but also magic and mystical and like metaphysical. It gets real metaphysical. And so in this galaxy, we're in the galaxy of Helios. And so this is where the Zodiac live. So we have the 12 Zodiac houses, like, Aries and Cancer and Sagittarius, etc. And so they all have like their own planets. And so wherever you're born, that's what you are. So if you're born on House Sagittarius, that's what you are.
Yeah.
And you don't choose which house you get to go to. You are where you're born at. And each of the 12 houses have their own unique strengths. And we follow Roma Grace, who is from Cancer, House Cancer, which is like a very oceany planet. And we find out that there used to be 13 houses, not just 12.
Is this mystery zodiac sign that they tried to invent and then change everybody's birth sign, but then nobody accepted it? So
no, actually, but beware of Ophiuchus, right? So Ophiuchus is actually technically the 13th zodiac. So if you start looking into this stuff, there's some people out there that actually believe in Ophiuchus and take the zodiac stuff way too seriously, but
yeah,
it is all fiction. It's all just made up by this author. But obviously she uses like the kind of stereotypical zodiac traits for each of the houses. Like Sagittarius are very curious and adventurous, and you can't hold them to one place for very long, and that kind of thing. And so it's very that kind of archetypes of people. And so House Cancer gets destroyed, and Roma Grace becomes the leader of the house now, even though she's only 16. And so she's dealing with this.
YA fantasy, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Never would happen in real life. And so one of the things they do is they read the stars to predict the future or see omens or whatever. And so Ro sees an omen in the stars that nobody else has seen, and no one believes her that this is going to happen. And then all hell breaks loose, and she's got to run around the galaxy trying to convince people that Ophiuchus is real and is trying to come back and destroy a bunch of stuff. And no one ever believes her at all. And so that's kind of like the pared down version, because I don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah.
But there's lots of themes of unity and tribalism in this book. So it's really about like not just doing stuff because this is the way we've always done it, and to question those things, and to question the people in power if they really have your best interest at heart, or if they're just interested in keeping the status quo. And so it's a lot of that, and a lot of political intrigue, but you also have a lot of really great character stuff. And like there's a lot of themes around the dangers of horizontal hostility, which is the idea that the people on there's way more people on the margins than there are people in the center. And horizontal hostility is the idea that people in the margins are fighting with each other rather than fighting with the people in the center who hold the most power. So who has the most power in society, and then extrapolating from there. And so that's kind of what this series is about. And basically this whole series just like rips my heart out and stomps on it multiple times, gives me a little bit of hope, and then stomps on it again. I cried so many times reading this series.
This is one I've never heard. I've never heard of it, and I'm so interested because
and I did a whole reread and did like live reactions to it to get people to understand why this book is such a big deal and why it's underrated, because it feels very relevant for this time. I think it came out in like 2014-ish area, and it just felt really relevant to I read this in like 2020, I think. So imagine everything that's going on around me in the world, and then reading this book about the powers that be not doing what they're supposed to do and not listening to everybody else that this thing is happening.
I'm having, yeah, you're giving me
Yeah,
flashbacks.
sorry. Um, but yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite series, and you get such great characters in this book. And there's actually, I usually hate love triangles. I really hate them because they're not done well usually, and I don't like the who will she pick, this
Well,
guy or this guy.
because more often than not, you don't care because there's clearly a winner and clearly a loser.
Exactly, but you
There's no
don't know.
tension.
You don't know in this one. It's another one of those love triangles that you're like, I don't know what's gonna happen. Or you think you know, and then the book's like, just kidding. Here's a different thing. And then it's like, no, just kidding. And you're just like, I really don't know who she's gonna go with. And it honestly doesn't matter as much as the rest of the stuff that's happening. And
Yeah,
that's one of the themes in this is like, I am trying to save the galaxy right now. Can we not talk about this?
exactly. Like the love arc doesn't have to be like the romance plot doesn't need to be like that big. It doesn't. It's not a main point of a fantasy novel. The main point is the fantasy and the sci-fi and all that sort of
Exactly.
thing. So out of curiosity, what star sign are you? Do you find that your planet represents you in this
Yeah, so
book?
I'm a Sagittarius, and I there's definitely a lot of the descriptions of the Sagittarian people that I'm like, yep, that's definitely me. It's the straightforward, blunt, very curious, not afraid to ask you a million questions, and the whole "don't hold me down" mentality, kind of. But I'm an introvert, so people
All
always
of that, but introverted.
and people always forget that introverted Sagittarians exist. So no, I don't want to go out and party and like do all this stuff. And no, I don't want to travel all over the place because I want to be home reading my books.
Having your fictional adventures in your
Exactly.
mind.
Exactly. And go to bed at a reasonable time.
Yeah, I don't think kids appreciate the luxury of sleep until they're an adult, and it is
Yeah.
actually really a luxury. Like getting to go to bed at a normal time is like a treat. It's a treat you give yourself.
Yeah.
um yeah, I always find so astrology I find interesting because I very much don't believe that horoscopes and astrology
Oh, me
have
either.
any bearing on people's lives, but I know a lot of people who are very interested in astrology and horoscopes and that sort of thing. My aunt is like really she finds them interesting, and I think I don't know necessarily that she maybe she does believe in them, but she always tells me about sort of how I'm very typical for my I'm an Aquarius.
Mhm.
So she sort of is always telling me about how I'm quite typical of that. And I mean, whenever I know someone who sort of knows a little bit about astrology and they're sort of talking listening to me talk about my family and the people I live with, they're just like I'm just like I live in a house full of Capricorns, and it's like they know everything they need to know because
Yeah.
my
I find it fascinating. I think it's interesting, and I think just like the personality types, some of it's going to fit you and then some of it's not. And it's just a lot of
yeah.
picking and choosing, but it is interesting. And mostly I'm just here for the memes, to be honest.
Yeah, I think more than anything, if you're going to read sort of description when they talk about the sort of characterizations, I think if anything, it's a really good way of self-reflecting, I suppose, like reflecting on your own qualities and how you see yourself. Because if you can read a description of what you're supposed to be like as per your star sign, it probably will tell you more about what you think about yourself and how you see yourself. Also, how other people see you if they feel that they represent you and you don't. And I think it's maybe more of a just interesting tool from that, but I do find it quite interesting. Again, it's one of those things like so my husband, my son, my dog, all Capricorns. Some of my very close friends are all Capricorns as well. And I'm like, I don't know what it is about me who likes to have people in my life who were born around Christmas. I just um, but yeah, I think it's really fascinating. I do actually kind of like reading books that are sort of based around it. Ashley V. Robertson actually sent me a book, Zodiac Star Force graphic novel, which is sort of superheroes and graphic novel that's based that they're all based on the star signs and stuff, and it's kind of fun and it's very pink and yeah, it's
Yeah.
got cool animation and everything. But and I
Yeah, it's a
really really
great way
enjoyed
to
that.
like distill archetypes of people. And it's a great way to start with characters in a story
Yeah.
and then kind of fleshing them out through that.
Yeah, definitely. You've got like a pre-existing character description and ideas for how I think that's probably a really great way of sort of yeah basis of characters and that sort of thing. So yeah, I find it interesting to read about, even if I don't necessarily agree. And you're right, the memes are excellent. There was one that was going around, I think Austen adaptations, like the on-screen adaptations of Austen movies, the characters in them, as all the different star signs. And I always just, I mean, that's like a convergence of like things that I love. So I was just like, yeah, that sounds great.
I'm gonna be that person that probably one of the only people that's gonna come on here and say I don't like Jane Austen.
Oh,
So
okay,
I'm
okay.
not
Well,
going to read her books. I'm not going to watch those movies. I don't care. And I know that when my friend Nicole Bailey hears this, she's just going to be giggling to herself because she loves Jane Austen and knows how much I hate it.
I think you like Regency era novels, and or you don't. Like it's really not a lukewarm kind of genre, because I just think it's like you say, you either care or you don't.
Yeah. No, that's
I
my
think
I just don't care enough about the story. Like, I gotta have dragons or aliens or something else happening.
oh yeah, for sure. If fantasy is your bag, then like yeah, Jane Austen doesn't have enough going on. I'm such a mood reader, and like my genre completely change the genres I read completely change based on the mood I'm in and what I'm feeling like. And like it's I don't know why, but sometimes something in me just calls for the false tension of, ridiculous British conventions to do with manners and when someone can stand up or talk to someone, and the kind of nuances of um yeah, society and expectations and classism, and and then there's other times when I'm like, no, I want some dragons to blow some stuff up. I want someone to I want political intrigue on an intergalactic scale. I want aliens. Like there are just I just yeah, different moods for different books and that sort of
I think
thing.
maybe that's the Sagittarian in me where I'm just like, I don't get it. Why wouldn't you just tell them that you like them? I don't get it. Like, what's with the eye twitch or like the lingering look? Like, I don't get it. Just tell them.
Just say it. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's just one of those things. It's just for some people and it's not for others. I mean, I have got authors that I know are just that are widely loved, and they're just not for me. It's like I don't really plan on ever reading Charles Dickens ever again. And I know a lot of people absolutely love him, and John Steinbeck. No, never
All
again,
set on the
never.
classics, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed classics when I was I kind of fell in love with certain classics when I was at school because of studying them. And even though I do go back to them every now and then, if I do, I think my absolute all-time favorite is like The Count of Monte Cristo, and that's because it's adventure, and it's like it's kind of like The Princess Bride. It's, high adventure and stakes, and it's fun. And I mean, the Count of Monte Cristo is like 1,000 pages, and it's like, well, it's 1,200 pages, and it's like worth every single page because like it's just the most long-winded revenge plot ever. It's just like, but it's so elaborate and amazing, and it just all comes together, and it's just yeah, it's great. But it's one of the it's the same thing. I think yeah, they're definitely my favorite. More the adventure kind ones, but no, I am a bit of a sucker for Jane Austen, except for Mansfield Park. Never Mansfield Park because it's awful. It's terrible. I
I'll
mean,
take your word for it.
yeah, she only wrote 7 books. She was never going to have all perfect ones, was she? One of them had to be bad. But yeah, so Zodiac, quartet series, you're really making my reading list quite long because I've been trying not to start any new series because I need to finish the ones I've got going. But um that sounds so I mean this just going back to this original threat, I suppose, does the threat change over the 4 books, or is it pretty much the
No,
same
it's
threat?
basically it's pretty much the same. There is a bit of a twist in some of the other books where you're like, oh, maybe this isn't really the villain that we need to be focusing on. And so there's a bit of like smoke and mirror thing happening there, which is nice. And like I said, the twists in this series too, like there's some stuff I just did not see happening at all, and then it hits you and you're like, ah.
that's always so impressive for like YA fantasy as well, because I often find when I'm reading a YA fantasy, I feel like I've read it all before.
Yeah.
And you'll get to certain points where, I mean, I was reading, this is no shade to Elwyn Hamilton, although kind of, because I also do have questions about those books. But the Rebel of the Sands series. I remember reading it and I was like, I can enjoy it, but I kind of got halfway through and I was like, yeah, but I know what's going to happen. I already know who she's going to end up with. I know basically the plot of the next two books, because I was just like, because that's just how YA fantasy trilogies that have some kind of monarchy that needs to be toppled, that's like the blueprint for how that
Mm.
story goes. So when a YA fantasy can actually take you by surprise, it's more impressive than anything else, because like
Yeah.
I don't mind knowing what the plot's gonna be. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm the kind of person who can still read a book that's been completely spoiled for them and I'll still enjoy it. I don't Spoilers don't ruin it. Predictability doesn't necessarily ruin it, especially because I'm character driven. So as long as I love the characters, I'll read the same story over and over again if it's
Yeah.
characters that I love. Um
Yeah,
but
the world building in this series is so good because you go to multiple different worlds and they all are wildly different from each other, and they all have their own technologies which are also wildly different from each other, and but it all kind of matches the kind of stereotype of each zodiac sign.
mm, that sounds so cool. I always find it ridiculous that Aquarius is an air sign. Like, it's got aqua in the name.
I know.
Someone messed something up there, because the symbols, the water, the lady with the two jugs, which is also the worst one as well. I have I'm not happy with the symbolism in my star sign personally, because I think everyone gets a cool animal and it's just a woman carrying jugs, pouring jugs of water.
You could be Virgo instead.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. But yeah, it's just one of those, I just like, so yeah, I don't get why it's an air planet. Not air planet, air star, air sign. But I suppose the planet in this story would be. I mean, I would hope it was earthy. I'm assuming this book is very well researched. I'm sure it will be
Yeah.
air
It'll make
related.
sense when you read it. You're like, oh yeah, that makes sense for this place.
Yeah, that's okay. That's what we
Make it
like,
different.
definitely.
Yeah, I don't know. I really like it. I really like the characterization, and I like how it all comes together in the end.
That's good. And there's the main points: characters, world, makes sense in the end. Basically, the
It's just
best.
really fun. It is a fun quartet, even though it seems like it's a lot, but it all it's fun. I think they're quick reads too. So
Great. And space-based sci-fi. I really I think I definitely want to expand my sci-fi reading. I've been reading more, but I still think my fantasy definitely outweighs it, and maybe some other genres as well. So I've been wanting to try and go more into that, because I always forget how much I enjoy reading sci-fi until I sort of pick up another sci-fi book,
yeah,
and then I'm like, oh my god, I forgot how fun this was. I've just finished Absinthe by Brandon P. Bellacourt, which is the first sci-fi I've read in a really long time, and it's it was so interesting and it was just so cool. And that's also kind of like alternative historical fiction as well, threaded into it, because it's set in like alternative 1920s Chicago.
oh nice,
And it's like, so it's all like Art Deco, Roaring Twenties, but also modern technology and a bit.
fascinating.
Yeah. But either way, so yeah, I always forget how much I enjoy sci-fi until I pick it back up again, and I could indulge in a little bit more astrology based fiction, because
Yeah, and like I
it's
said, it's
fun.
a nice blend of sci-fi and fantasy. So there's a like I said, there's a lot of like metaphysical stuff that happens. So it's kind of weird.
Yeah. Why not have both? Sci-fi or fantasy, or just have both. Always good. So those are your 5 books. Do you want to quickly run through all 5 of your choices for the listener, and then we can talk about,
Yes.
any honorable mentions?
Yes. So in no particular order, we had Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. And that one was about Tarasai and how she has to try to get on this Council of 11, but also she's supposed to kill the prince, so that's not great. The second one was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, which was an adult sci-fi / historical fiction about a woman who comes from the 1970s and goes all the way back to antebellum, south and has to save a white man in order for her to continue to exist. The next one was The Princess Bride by William Goldman, which I'm sure needs no summary. And The Bone Witch by Rin Chupeco, which was a YA fantasy about a bone witch or a necromancer. And the last one was Zodiac by Romina Russell, and that one was sci-fi fantasy and was just all the Zodiac-like things that we were just talking about.
Awesome. Really fun sci-fi fantasy, just really fun list of books, I think, and definitely lots for people to sink their teeth into and try out. What were a few books that you wanted to have but you couldn't quite squeeze into your list? The books that these narrowly beat.
All right, so my honorable mentions were Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey. That's a long, long book. It's over 1,000 pages, but
Yeah.
it's wonderful. I felt like it was the soft version of like Game of Thrones almost. Uh, and I also had Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell, which is a sci-fi, and that one was excellent. That's an adult book, and just
I've read that one.
it's so good.
Yeah.
I just like
Politics in that one, space politics.
space politics. And then I had also The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, which I also reread this year.
The Raven Boys is very well loved on the podcast. Almost every one of the books in the series, except for one, has been picked. They've all been picked for different reasons. I always find it really interesting. I'm waiting for that last one to get picked, so so all four of them can be listed.
Yeah,
But
I think if
yeah,
I didn't pick The Raven Boys, probably my favorite of the series would have been The Dream Thieves.
yeah, I think the Dream Thieves has been picked. Is it Lily
Blue
Blue?
Lily, Lily Blue,
Blue Lily, Lily Blue, and
The
is it?
Raven King.
Yeah, and yeah. Is there only three of them?
I'm missing one.
Is it the Dream? No, we did the Dream
I don't
Thieves,
know.
didn't we? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Either way, three of the
Anyway,
four have been picked. But yeah, the Raven Boys is very well loved, and Winter's Orbit is a good one. I enjoyed that one when I read it. It's one of the few sort of Illumicrate books that I got, and then I actually read it straight away. But yeah, space politics and an arranged marriage, which is
yeah, which I
yeah,
absolutely loved actually.
yeah, me too. I was so invested because no, it's great. I actually definitely I also second your recommendation on that one because
I
it's
just
just such a
wanted to wrap
fun.
Shining up in a blanket and keep him safe.
It's such a wholesome like relationship. I actually really loved that in this sort of actually like not very nice kind of corrupt world. I think it would have been so easy to reach for a relationship that had all of these like issues,
Yeah.
and even though they're obviously not, it's not got issues, the issues aren't to do with the people, it's to do with the circumstance. And I really just, it was just so wholesome. They just treat each other so well, and they're just so lovely and just kind, and there's no ill will, and I just loved it. I was just like, this is just such a wholesome relationship. I love it. But yeah, so those are some. Kushiel's Dart, actually, I've heard of. It used to be on my TBR, and I remember I saw how long it was, and it scared me, and I was like, no.
It's very long, but it's so good. It's so well written. The fantasy is not super in your face. It's more
Well,
like adventure kind of thing almost, and it's got like a Machiavellian villainess in it, which I'm here for.
ooh, yeah, more female villains because I just I sorely lacking in that department. More female villains that not necessarily of the Disney variety. I think yeah, again, really random, but Tangled, for instance, I watched that recently and I was so impressed with it because I find Mother Gothel just one of Disney's best villains, I think. I
Uh,
think
yeah,
yeah, because I find it so fascinating because she's not a bad guy because of what she can do. It's not that she's magic or she's scary or anything that like that. It's entirely like emotional abuse and
yeah.
manipulation. Like
She's a
that's her
narcissist, and
exactly. She is a
I love
narcissist.
that too because you rarely ever see like complicated mother-daughter stuff where the mother is emotionally abusive and it
Mm,
is accepted that the daughter will just not talk to her anymore.
yeah.
So and if that relates to me personally because my mother is also a narcissist and I no longer talk to her.
Same. We should start a club. Yeah, I
But
yeah, well, but this is the thing. I actually found it really fascinating because complicated relationship with my mother, who is a narcissist along with several other of her own issues, and I find it so difficult because when people ask me about my family, especially since I've had a child myself, you get so many complicated, very intrusive questions about your involvement and that sort of thing, and I hate this whole but they're your family
mm,
excuse as if blood and familial bonds is the cleanser that can wipe away any any
yeah,
issues, which is just not true.
no, and
And
I
there's
find
so
that reasoning so toxic.
yeah, and it's just there's so much like emotional guilt around it, like there's something like and I found it really fascinating thinking that someone on the team at Tangled they must have had a narcissistic parent because it's such a unique dynamic in a way that I hadn't realized was true because it took me years and years before I even had the words to describe what my mother was and what she did. Because they sort of were handed to me and just like, oh, you do realize that she's this, right? And then it kind of explained everything so much
Yeah,
better to sort of explain to me why it wasn't my fault. It wasn't for lack of trying on my part. It was something I couldn't change essentially, which is
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah, which
it
is
took me a while too because I worked for a domestic violence project for about 5 years. So I was a domestic
yeah.
violence advocate and educator, and it took me working there for a year for me to realize that, like, oh, this is what has been happening to me my entire life. So yeah, definitely
Yeah.
having the words for that and understanding the dynamics of power and control
Mm.
were definitely key to my healing through that.
Yeah, exactly. And healing's the word. It's healing to have the words to describe what happened to you, and also I hadn't realized quite how the interplay of parenthood and narcissism um crossed over because I kind of knew it, and then I through some research of my own actually found that like there is a way that parenthood changes the um sort of almost characteristics of not necessarily changes someone from being a narcissist, but it interacts with narcissism in a way that is just really unique to having children, I suppose. And that dynamic between a child and a narcissistic parent is kind of different to a narcissist and someone in their life who's like not related to them in that way.
Yeah,
And I just find it so interesting that a that words existed for it, but also b that this was an experience that actually a lot of people shared because I always felt very alone in it as an issue, and it felt like not many people understood. So when I actually spoke to other people who had been through a similar thing, it was like, yes, this is not good because no one wants anyone to have gone through that because
right.
it's not nice, but like to be seen and understood in that way is great. And I remember I hadn't watched Tangled because I wasn't up to date on my Disney, and then I was told to watch it because someone I know really loves it, and I remember watching it and I just found it just really haunting because I was like, Rapunzel isn't trapped in the tower. She can leave whenever she wants. She's being trapped by
Yes,
emotional
absolutely.
abuse.
Yeah,
And it was just haunting, and just that just the scene when she leaves and she's just it's just amazing. It's so well written. I just it's impressive. So more more female villains, but
well,
also
now I have to
more
rewatch Tangled.
also the music's amazing. Oh my god, just like I don't think I'd even watched it, and we went to Disneyland for my honeymoon. Which, because we're big kids, basically we're like we're not grown up enough to be getting married. We'll get married, and then we'll go to Disneyland to address the balance. Um, so we went to Disney and we watched the fireworks display, and I see the light as part of the sort of big fireworks photo things to play, and oh my god, I cried like a baby. I was just there cradling my coffee sobbing. Just thinking because they had sort of projected the scene up with the music, and then there's all the other Disney music, which has all of this other emotional like
Aw,
baggage around it. Honestly, it was hands down one of the best nights like ever. But
that's cool.
emotional. It is. They call it the Magic Kingdom for a reason. I didn't believe it till I saw it. But yeah, I mean, a fitting way to finish the podcast with just like a really mad tangent that really took us. I mean, I say it took us. I took us around the houses with that one. Honestly, when people tell me that I talk a lot and I talk about random stuff, I'm like, you don't know. You don't live in my mind. I say like 20% of what I think. Try living here. But yeah, Cheyenne, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been so much fun and
Yeah, thanks
such
for
a
having
good.
me, Jordan. I really appreciate you reaching out to me.
I so appreciate you giving me your time. Honestly, it's been so fun. It's been such an interesting discussion. So many great books, and yeah, it's been awesome. If listeners wanted to check you out and check out more of your recommendations, where might they find you?
So people can find me on Instagram at queer_bookwyrm, and be very clear, bookworm is spelled with a Y, not an O, because fantasy.
Yes, exactly. It's the dragon-esque spelling of worm.
Yes,
It's the I think when you call anyone a bookworm, that's how it should be spelled. You have the correct spelling
yes,
because yes, it's worm like the dragon, not worm like the invertebrates.
absolutely. Yeah, feel free to follow me, and give me more book recommendations because clearly I don't have enough to read.
No, no one does. No one does. I will definitely add all of your sort of accounts and that sort of thing in the podcast description if any listeners want to go and check them out. And yeah, you can follow the podcast on at Books to Last Pod on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook because they made me have Facebook, but I don't use it. But you can follow it if you wish. We're also available on YouTube and anywhere that they have podcasts. If there's anywhere that they have podcasts and we aren't on there, feel free to let me know and I'll try and get the podcast on there. But yes, for now, that's it. But thank you so much for listening, Cheyenne. Thank you so much for being on. It's been so much fun,
Thank you.
and yeah, and until next time, bye for now.